it's my shirt again. This is actually editing me. Hello from the past. I had to record another intro because I had to split up last week's video into two because it was just mind-bogglingly long. And so welcome to this week's video. Today I'm actually going to talk about the do's and don'ts of killing characters and actual emotional effects you need on character deaths. Because after we've talked about how we had to actually kill our characters, this week we're going to talk about how to do that without pissing people off. And the problems that I found when watching movies and TV, where like I said, I find most of the problems, how we might be able to fix that going forward. So, if you want to kill a character, how do you do it? You have to make us care about the characters you're killing. Think about Star Trek's red shirts, right? And any war movie or superhero or action movie where they're just killing the bad guys. Those are like, think about it, those are like actual people with actual lives and actual families and like actual people who are going to mourn for them, but we don't even care that they're dead because they're just sort of, they're cannon fodder. They're cannon fodder. It's so prevalent that Iron Man 3 hilariously made fun of this when Tony like breaks out of his thing and starts like murdering everybody, and one of the guys just immediately drops everything and goes, I just work here, these guys are crazy. Like, that's hilarious. You don't want to make a main character cannon fodder unless there is a purpose to that. The best example I have ever seen of a character who's basically cannon fodder being killed for plot reasons and actually having an emotional impact on the story is Cedric Diggory. Now, Cedric Diggory wasn't exactly a red shirt. He was in TV Tropes terms, more of a mauve shirt. Mauve shirt. It is mauve, I think. We've got to know him, but really all we know about him is that he's a goody two-shoes, and he literally only dies so that Voldemort can like prove that he's back to himself as much as his followers. But the death is really emotionally affecting, even though we don't actually know that much about him. Think about Amos Diggory's "my boy, it's my boy." Like, I cannot watch that scene because it gets to me so much. We see the consequences of a cannon fodder character actually being mourned by people, and it's horrendous. It's horrendous. So, can people be killed for plot reasons and have it work? Yes. But in my opinion, you have to have some sort of emotional consequences of that. However, there are some really emotionally manipulative ways that people try and do this. One of the ways that people will try and get an emotional reaction out of people is by killing characters that you don't have any use for, but that their death doesn't actually impact the story. This is probably going to be the deaths that people will murder you for. Newton Hicks in Aliens is probably the best example. Captain Hiller in Independence Day Resurgence, they die so unbadassly. And these are characters that we've come to know as badasses, and it really, really pisses people off when they're dispatched like, it doesn't matter. When you're trying to do a Voldemort with Laurie Strode in Halloween Resurrection, when you're trying to show Michael Myers as like this like extra evil person, but all it does is piss people off. Sometimes this can actually have a real emotional effect if you play your cards right. My two favorite examples are Jason Gideon from Criminal Minds and Cinna in The Hunger Games. In Criminal Minds, Mandy Patinkin left the show very, very early. He is barely mentioned again after he leaves. Seasons and seasons and seasons and seasons later, he's killed off. And the BAU has to then solve his murder. Now, this is extremely emotionally effective, A, because they have the younger version of him played by the always lovable Ben Savage, especially because of the ways that his death affect the characters. There's a real continuity to seeing the way especially Reed, who was in canon really, really close to him, react to this and just be so emotionally affected by it. If you do it right and you see the real emotional effects on the cast and on the characters, killing someone you don't need anymore off screen can be effective, but we don't see that in Aliens so much. We don't see that in Independence Day so much. We hear about it and it's like, and that's why these characters are gone. No, there's a real impact to the way the BAU responds to Gideon's death, and I think that it's one of the better examples. On the other hand, if you kill a character off screen, it can be absolutely terrifying, and Cinna is my favorite example of this. All we know is that he was dragged away. We don't know what happened to him. His death isn't even officially confirmed. I mean, we all know he's dead, but like there's no like official funeral for the man. It never happens. But we know that he's been taken away by the Capitol, and we know that that can't be good. But it's the not knowing what happened to him that can be just as effective. If you know that they're in the clutches of someone and they're not making it out, it's the not knowing, it's the suspense of not knowing, it's your mind filling in the blanks that can only be as terrible as you think it is, that can be just as effective. But again, you have to have a suitably emotional or suitably terrifying context in order for those deaths to actually mean anything. But what happens when you take those emotions too far? Some people can be incredibly emotionally manipulative. One of the most famous examples of this kind of emotional manipulation is the fatal family photo. If someone pulls out a picture of their family, or mentions their family, or a family memento, or talks about their kids, or mentions their kid, or says, "This is for you, daughter," they did. It shows up in Harry Potter when Lupin shows Harry a picture of Teddy. It shows up in Daredevil, where we're introduced to Ben Urich's Alzheimer's-ridden wife. And it shows up in movies like Black Hawk Down, Apocalypse Now, Predator, Godzilla, a chain reaction version, and Saving Private Ryan. It's really, really popular in war films. Like, the person who has a picture of their family, they did. That's just emotionally manipulative. It's so emotionally manipulative that Age of Ultron tried to use it to subvert our expectations by showing Hawkeye's like happy family, having him pull out a picture of his family right before he goes to war, setting him up to die, and then saving him at the last minute. People did not like that because that was blatant emotional manipulation. And it's not good when you use it to subvert expectations, and it's not good when you do it straight. It's manipulative. The other way that people do this is to stuff someone in the fridge. Bond girls are notorious for this. They almost never make it through the film. But one time, Bond marries someone in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and she doesn't even make it to the goddamn honeymoon. Supernatural is so famous for this. And this is actually pretty notoriously because fans were so into Wincest, gross, and the boys' relationships with Castiel that any single time a woman was introduced, fans would hate her because they thought she was getting in the way. So that's why there are no long-lasting women on Supernatural, because fuck you, kinda. It really makes people angry when you kill a character for the express purpose of motivating someone else. I'm not gonna go on an exhaustive list because there's just too many, but since it's mostly women being murdered for the sake of providing angst for a man, it's also incredibly sexist. I'll come back to those ideas later on, but it is important to mention that while death can be a motivator, I mean, think about Uncle Ben, it's probably the most famous motivator. There needs to be more there, because just killing someone for shock value and to motivate a character, that's just pure emotional manipulation. Again. Okay, so emotion, bad. What about no emotion? What if we just fucking murder him? Well, I love that. I mean, Deep Blue Sea is famous for the shark and the Sam Jackson and the brilliant. Fans oftentimes don't like this. Sometimes it's just offensive to the people they're killing. Dark Knight, when they kill Two-Face, they don't even like kill him like heroically. They build it up and he's, you know, presumably killed, but turns out he's actually two-faced, and they bring up his ascent into evil and supervillainy, and then he's knocked off a building. The Warriors 3 and Ragnarok are unceremoniously just like, oh, you're there, we don't want you anymore, murder. Now, I'm not going to say the fans particularly minded that one, but it was extremely obvious that like they barely even got like a second thought before killing them. Probably the example that bothered me the most though was in The Defenders, when they killed Sigourney Weaver's character Alexandra. They attempted to do this thing, which they started in Luke Cage, where they kill the villain as a shock value thing for the audience. When they killed Mahershala Ali's character Cottonmouth in Luke Cage, it was brilliant. It was shocking. It was everything. I loved that scene. They couldn't justify this incredible scene with the villain they replaced him with. He was just too interesting, and they didn't have an interesting enough backup. Not only did they do that again in The Defenders, but it was particularly egregious because she was mid-monologue. And replaced her with Elektra, which no one was happy about, and the last episode wasn't particularly interesting. Now, Alexandra wasn't the most interesting villain. She spent a lot of time sitting and talking, but if you're thinking about Elektra versus Sigourney Weaver, you've got an easy winner. But sometimes this is absolutely the right way to murder someone. I mean, like I said, think about Samuel L. Jackson in Deep Blue Sea. If you haven't seen Endgame yet, what are you doing? but Thanos is decapitated 20 minutes into the movie unceremoniously, and it is hilarious. The singing telegram woman in Clue, which is one of my favorite movies, and I will fight you on that, doesn't even get to finish her song. It's like mid-song. I love it. And they are even able to make fun of this in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the Castle Og, where they argue over whether or not someone who is dying would take the time to actually write ah. Now we know kind of how to and how not to. I'm gonna say be careful who you kill. One of the most common and popular ways to do it now is to kill everybody. Now this can be killing them and bringing them back, which I despise, which they did in Once Upon a Time, they did it in the Vampire Diaries, they do it in Supernatural all the fucking time. That was for an earlier rant. But sometimes they try and actually murder people. Game of Thrones is obviously famous for this. There was this masochistic sort of joy that people got of collectively watching the show, where it's the appeal is that everybody dies and you have no idea if it's going to be your favorite character or if it's going to be someone else. It was good fun until they lost their nerve, and then that made people actually turn off from the show. When they stopped killing major characters, people started to get bored, because obviously they couldn't kill too many characters because all of these people were set up to be important for the end. But that was what Game of Thrones was so good at, was making sure characters, you know, didn't finish out their character arcs. It was realistic death, and that stopped happening towards the end because they were more interested in the story they were trying to tell, which is debatable whether or not you liked it or not, to actually kill people the way they used to be killing people. And that was something that really disappointed people. But sometimes this is done really badly too. Think about Scream Queens. When it was first advertised, it was that a main character dies every week, and people were really excited for another joyful masochistic experience, but it didn't happen. Background characters at best were the only ones that were killed. Yes, someone died every week, but it was nobody important. We got a couple supporting characters towards the end, but almost all of the major characters lived, and people hated it. It got renewed for a second season, but nobody watched it. I think I watched like the first episode and was like, no, it was boring to me. It was boring. If you're going to advertise your work on the basis that everybody dies, you have to commit to it. Otherwise, people are going to not really trust it. And then if you're going to kill all those people, make sure they stay dead. But sometimes killing everybody is not the best option. Sometimes you can really, really offend people with the people you kill. And this is my serious face. This is my no longer ranting. This is like, guys, seriously. Obviously, the most famous version of this, like I said above, was stuffing people into the fridge, and the black guy dies first. Now this is being taken now to be like the token minority, and it's actually statistically been proven not to be true, but it happens enough that it's noticeable, and it happens enough in big budget films that it's obnoxious. Even though they're not the first people to go, in Infinity War, my friend was incredibly bothered by the fact that you see Black Panther and Falcon die one right after another. So it was pretty obvious who they were killing. They were going to leave the major Avengers alive. It was the order in which they decided to do it just showed, hey, we're killing off the only minorities we have, and that was really egregious. The other most egregious version is Dick Halloran, who's the only character killed by Jack Torrance in The Shining, and he doesn't die in the book. It appears in Full Metal Jacket, it appears in Aliens, it appears in Apocalypse Now, Jurassic Park, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on a main character level, maybe American Psycho, depending on if it's all in his name. Those are big name films, and just because it's not statistically true, it's noticeable enough in big name films that it started to be kind of offensive, enough for people to continue to make fun of it. Stop that. Another group of people who's often the first killed are LGBTQ people, and sometimes it's just killing off those characters in the first place. Very, very famously, the murders of Tara and Lexa in Buffy and the 100 really, really upset people because, you know, they finally had characters who were happy in an LGBT relationship only for the partners to be killed off. And just like The Shining, the recent assassination of Gianni Versace actually changed historical fact to try and do this. In real life, Lee Miglin, to our knowledge, was not gay, but the show made him a closeted gay guy, according to TV Tropes, just to make all of the murder victims gay men, which was particularly egregious because you're not just changing source material, you're changing historical understanding. I'm not going to say historical fact because it's possible, but you're changing historical understanding. Almost every soap opera kills all the gay people. Downton Abbey, Doctor Who, Arrow, This is so pertinent that in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., when they mention two characters who in the comics are in a same-sex relationship, they refused to mention that either woman was gay because they didn't want to risk the unfortunate implications when they were killed. There's also this idea that we can't kill women, or that we have to kill more men than women. This is something I experienced when I was in theater. In fight scenes, women were allowed to hit women, men were allowed to hit men, women were allowed to hit men, but men were not allowed to hit women. And this was for quite obvious reasons of, you know, unfortunate implications. But women are often left out of war movies for historical accuracy's sake, as though women only existed recently. So you'll see cities getting destroyed. So you'll have emotional connections to the men who are killed. You'll see cities being destroyed, but you won't see the women and children in it dying. According to the director of Jack the Giant Slayer, which is not a great movie, all of the giants shown in the film are male because they didn't want to kill any women on screen. Like, fuck you, kind of. Like, we are equals, I will die alongside my male peers. It's offensive that you don't want to kill me. And there's an actual advisory on The Sopranos when it aired that there was gross, what was it? The quote was, very strong, brutal violence, sometimes even directed at women. It's like, you know when you show like skin and like sex scenes, when women show skin, it's like fine, but the minute like men show everything, it's like an immediate like higher rating. It's like that. If men die, it's fine, but if women die, you know, R rating. You're not fragile butterflies. Either kill us more or kill men less. It's not fair to assume that it's okay to kill men, but that it's not okay to kill women, because that's kind of offensive on both sides. Kill us equally? Maybe? That'd be nice. The last thing I'm going to talk about, should I kill the hero? Maybe. Tragedies? Yes. Shakespeare's quite famous for doing that, and it's sometimes very upsetting. Hamlet, you idiot. But, you know, sometimes it's not great. People had mixed feelings over the killing of Tris in Allegiant. There's this Nicolas Cage movie, Knowing, where aliens just take two children away to be like Adam and Eve, or Noah and his wife or whatever, and then the entire world just ends. That kind of leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, especially since the movie isn't great. Pay It Forward really pissed people off because it was supposed to be this movie about, you know, children doing nice things, and then, oh, so much for your nice things, you get dead. Cool. And despite its true to legend nature, fans were furious when Arthur was killed at the end of Merlin. That's what happens. Have you read Arthurian legend? He dies. He gets dead. People were really, really unhappy about it, which, as an Arthurian scholar, makes me go, "Rah." But if you're a fan, I completely understand. Sometimes killing the hero just doesn't, it's tragedy for the sake of tragedy, and especially for Merlin, which until season 4 was pretty much a kid's show. You know, probably just wasn't what fans were expecting. You have to make sure that you set this up clearly enough so if the hero dies, it's not sort of out of nowhere shock value things. But it can work. The Wicker Man, not the Nick Cage version, we're talking the original version, which I think is amazing. I'm gonna watch that movie today now. I love cults. It's a classic horrifying. It's that kind of dread and futility that you get at the end of watching a movie like that. Walter White's death at the end of Breaking Bad is quite famous for being exactly what people needed. Everybody knew he had to die at the end. He started the show being diagnosed with terminal cancer, but it was the way that he was killed. See, that's exactly the point. They had set this up from the beginning that this character wasn't going to live through it. So you had to make his death suitably epic. And that's when killing the character becomes acceptable. Similarly, Fruitvale Station, which is just God. That's based on historical events, so you know he's gonna die. So you're basically waiting the whole time for this tragedy of a life cut short and the potential that you don't get to fulfill. You know, sometimes it makes people really mad, but sometimes it's the perfect ending, and you really have to juggle that. So thank you for watching that video. If you check out my website, I will post anything that I cut out in a blog post, which you will see on Mondays. So stay tuned for that. Be sure to check that out. We have a lot to talk about, so be sure to check that out on Monday. Also check out my social media in the description box below. Also the links to my website and my newsletter will be there, so please sign up for those. I'm really excited about those as well. And I will see you next time. Okay, bye.